welcome to the very first introductory episode of Financial Floss. We are super excited to bring you this podcast, brought to you by Profi 2020 Dental CPAs. My name is Chris Sands, and I will be your host, oftentimes frequented by several others in our company, namely my partner, Brent Saunier, CPA. Again, we are both, the two of us as partners and our organization, super thrilled and excited to finally launch this podcast and get connected to those of you out there in private practice who may be looking for a little bit more education and empowerment in your personal and business finances. You know, the idea behind the name Financial Floss came about in that I have just always been one of those people who, you know, I gotta tell you, it's an odd comment that I say over and over again, but I've never had a cavity. I've never had any serious dental work that was required. I've had a little bit of elective work, but as far as my health, you know, part of that might be genetics, but the other part of it is just I'm one of those weird people that happens to floss every day, at least once, and a lot of times twice a day. It takes very little bit amount of time, and it has saved me a lot of pain and money. And if you take that same concept and apply it to other things in your life, I have come to learn, at least, that the preventative approach is always the best approach. It requires a little bit more diligence and stewardship. It requires discipline. It requires reminding yourself and challenging yourself. But, you know, I think the cheesy analogy that's a lot of times referred to is it's not much different than, you know, making sure you're preventative with your vehicle, that you have regular, consistent, preventative oil changes, things like that. Same thing with your oral health, and absolutely that is the premise of this podcast. It's the same concept when it comes to anything in your finances, whether that is in your personal life or in your business. And the business takes even more attention on a higher frequency, a daily frequency, especially in dentistry, where your collections do come in daily. And why you floss daily is the same reason that you should pay attention to your finances daily. So that is the premise of Financial Floss, the name, and it's something that I live by. When I made that analogy for myself, it is something that I constantly challenge myself, whether it's my, you know, health and exercise, whether it's intentional time and attention to my children or my wife. Everything in life tends to get better when you pay attention to it or give it some extra care on a higher frequency, maybe even less dosage, higher frequency. So Financial Floss is popped into my head because I oftentimes will tell people, just like you have to floss the bacteria out of your mouth, you have to floss your finances on a frequent basis. And we will cover all aspects of that thought, whether it is just cash flow planning or goal setting, paying off debt, saving for retirement, whatever it is that you do with your finances, whatever your personal goals are, somehow money is involved. And that being the case, you would think you should have a deep interest in learning exactly how money works, all facets of it, how everything that you encounter in your daily life involving money, how it works. Credit card charges and interest on your mortgage, taking out loans, taxes and the tax brackets and the entire tax code. There is so much I can understand why it would seem overwhelming. And therefore, we are here to create an avenue, to create an outlet for you to ask your questions, for us to provide answers and education and knowledge and understanding. And that is the major void in dentistry or in healthcare professions as a whole, is there is a void in financial understanding. And I will never forget that when this became abundantly clear to me, it was a young dentist, one of my early, maybe, you know, very first dental clients that I'd stumbled my way into meeting. And he told me in maybe our second meeting together, he goes, you know, or maybe I asked him, I said, you know, are you getting anything out of this? Is this valuable to you? And he was a little bit shocked, and he was almost apologetic. And he said, if I if I'm coming off as, if you're not seeing that this is valuable to me, let me try to explain something. We're about the same age. We're probably in college the same time. And I was a science major, and you were a business major. And those two schools were on opposite sides of campus. And he said that he stayed as far away from math and business as he could. And I replied and said, that's very interesting that you say that. I stayed as far away from science as I could. And I think what we shared in common, which this is a strength, we focused on what our strengths were, and we avoided positioning ourselves or exposing ourselves to our weaknesses. And I think that's a topic for another time. But in society, it's something I think about often with my own kids, that they get good grades in certain areas, math and history and science and literature and whatever those areas are. And there's often one or two subjects where they do not get the best grade. And at least in this country, I think all too often we end up focusing on just the negative. We end up focusing on just where their weaknesses are. And we get tutors and we try to hammer it into them. And, some things you just have to get past. You just have to get enough, credit to move on. But if we would focus more on our strengths, that's where we really blossom. I think, each of us is unique and has some God-given abilities that are our personal strengths. And if we would just focus on those areas, that's what helps us thrive. So the people that I encounter, I believe we're all doing the same thing, but we're judging ourselves the wrong way. Most of the people we work with are dentists, practicing clinicians, and they are super hyper-focused on their clinical abilities. They take a lot of CE courses. They take advanced education to further their surgical abilities and all of the dental procedures and capabilities that they can offer to patients. That takes up a lot of time and energy, and they're passionate about it, and they're great at it. And then you find that maybe, not in all cases, but in a lot of cases, they're not so strong in their finances. And I think that there's a societal pressure or societal rub that, either highly educated people or people in certain positions, such as physicians or dentists in healthcare, that, they make a lot of money, which can be true. But the false perception is that, they're all rich. And my experience says otherwise. That yes, they have the ability to and can make and a lot to make a great income, but they don't always keep it. And they are very scared or apprehensive, or they have a lot of anxiety around the subject of finance and money. And I am here to tell you that you should not feel ashamed whatsoever. You are a specialist in something that I just don't think I could ever personally do. It's not my strength, and I identified that early on, probably in my early teens, that I was not great at the subject of science. And so I avoided it like the plague. And my strength was in math and in finance. I gravitated toward that. And so I have taken that and I've tried to become the best specialist I can be in that craft. And the real challenge that we all have is then to truly prove that you're the best or that you're the expert in something, is to be able to explain it to a 6-year-old. And this is no different than, when you are explaining someone's x-ray, you're detailing out why you have designed this treatment plan, you're explaining why you believe someone should follow through with what you're recommending for their own health. If you can't explain it in a simple way, people just aren't going to get it. They're not going to do it. They're not going to comply, and it's going to be a rough path. And I certainly myself struggled with that. You want to show everyone how knowledgeable you are, how much you know. You want to display. I mean, it's almost like a peacock, fluttering their feathers and showing them off. And that's not what it's about. It's about empowering others with your knowledge. It's not about displaying the knowledge you have. It's about transferring that knowledge in a simple, digestible, understandable way. And so there's this void, again, in dentistry and in healthcare of financial understanding. And that is not a scarlet letter to be wearing, okay? That is something that you should raise your hand and say, well, this is an area that I'm not the strongest at. I'm not the expert, so maybe I should talk to some of the people who are experts. And it's tough in the world we live in today. I think, I grew up, many of you remember this, I grew up when I remember, very vividly when Napster came out. You remember Napster? So Napster was the very first or most prominent free file sharing of audio files. It began the audio revolution to end CDs at the time and move into MP3 files. And we as a youth began to not have to pay for the music, and that eventually had some legal changes that came about, and today we live in the world of streaming. But it was, to me, I identify that point as a point in time where I felt like, everything should be free or can be free, and that includes knowledge, and you can learn things. And then became YouTube, okay, and the revolution that brought on. You can pretty much YouTube any subject and find a video on it. And you can try to figure out how to do something yourself. But there are just certain things in life that, the do-it-yourself mentality can hurt you in. I would never give myself my own injection. I would never pull my own tooth. I just don't think I would be very well served doing that myself. And so sometimes that seems a little bit more clear to most people, to go to a dental professional, or you would say that, but even dentistry has experienced this with the advent, or I don't know if that's the right word, but the change in self-aligners or clear aligners, do-it-yourself aligners. And you know what I'm talking about. That has come along in the do-it-yourself society, where it's like, if we can drop the price, make it something that's easily accessible, and everyone feels like they can have access to it and do it themselves, it's probably the same as what you'd be paying some professional to do a much better job at. Well, I don't, personally, my results in anything that I've tried that on, whether it be to my do-it-yourself projects on my house, anything that's just outside my normal skill set that I don't have a lot of practice doing, I have found that I've screwed it up. And so I know that to be the case through encountering so many people. I know that to be the case for most clinicians when it comes to their numbers and their finances. They may even try to have a go at it. And one of the most frequent examples that we deal with in our tax and accounting firm is the do-it-yourself accounting, the do-it-yourself bookkeeping, because bookkeeping must be mindless work, like a monkey punching in numbers, and anybody should be able to do that. That's at least the thought. And especially when someone hasn't had an accounting class, or they don't know that there's something out there called GAAP, generally accepted accounting principles, they're not exactly quite sure where to allocate depreciation or amortization. They're not quite sure where to allocate on the profit and loss statement or the balance sheet the portion of their loan payment that is interest or principal. And they think, well, I do my own bookkeeping. Well, do you do your version of that, right? Is it actual sound accounting? It has to be looked at. So I digress, but the point is that we are here to educate and empower on all of those subjects that you may feel less competent in or less confident in. And that's a big part is building that confidence. And doing that comes with, being able to explain things in simple terms, being able to create clarity, and as much as we can to give you little nuggets of action items that you can take back from every episode. And so I think, from this episode, if you, to see if you're a match for, not only for our firm, if you ever want to entertain becoming a client of our firm, but to see if you're a match for this podcast, and this will be abundantly clear throughout the episodes. Probably the most important aspect, or the most important feature, or the most important personality trait that's a match for this is someone who is growth oriented, where there's always another mountain to climb. You do want to celebrate your wins and celebrate your accomplishments. But if you have that hunger to continuously learn and grow and develop, to attain a new level, to not, to outgrow your current self, this is going to be for you, because that's the definition of me. And as your host of this podcast, I'm going to try to put you in front of a lot of those same like-minded individuals. It's a tough thing. It's a tough thing to build that kind of team in your dental practice. It's no easier in a tax and accounting practice. But to find those kinds of people and then to hold on to them. There are certain topics that you can discuss with those kinds of people that you just can't discuss with others. You may not be able to discuss it with your own family, your own parents, your own, hopefully it's not the same with your spouse, but to ask yourself every day, how am I going to be better today than I was yesterday? This is the ultimate challenge. And in the context of this podcast, we are primarily focused on finance, but there's so much more in life that is interwoven, and finance is just a part of our everyday lives and our life story. But to want to grow and evolve financially, the concept of financial floss is constant attention, more frequent attention, and a greater desire, okay, to improve financially. So if you feel great about your skill set as a clinician, but not so great about your skill set in your finances or as a business owner, we hope that, by committing to Financial Floss, the podcast, and the principles, the lessons and on business and on finance, that you will enjoy this podcast. You'll find it something that you can really grow from, whether you're listening in your car or at home or going to bed in the evening, or during your breaks at work. We hope that there's something that you can grow, and if you do, we want you to share that with us, please. We want you to share with us your wins so we can celebrate them with you. We want you to also send us your questions and the things you'd like to know more about. We do have some content planned, but we will no doubt be entertaining and always looking for new content to share. So you can reach us online. Our website is profi2020.com, profi2020.com. And you can email us at info@profi2020.com. And you can find us on all forms of social media. So Profi2020, at Profi2020 on Instagram, Facebook, LinkedIn. And please also follow our podcast Facebook page, Financial Floss, and subscribe anywhere that these podcasts get loaded. So I will tell you, this being the first episode, this is probably my, 15th or 20th cut of this. I have sat here and tried to do it in front of people that are helping me. I have sat here and tried to do it by myself, and I'm doing it right now, and it is super awkward. And I've been on several podcasts where we're doing it either live over a Zoom, or we're doing it on just over the phone, being recorded. I hate the way, I think this applies to everybody, one of the concepts of, if you ever want to get better at public speaking. I love public speaking, by the way. I think I thrive on stage. I enjoy it. I thrive off of the crowd. Well, I don't have the crowd in front of me right now. You're out there listening, and I need that feedback to get me enthused. But the thing I've learned is that if you really want to get good at something, you have to watch and listen to yourself on camera and on audio. And I promise you one thing, you won't sound the same afterwards. You will be better. And so each time I've ever done this, I'm like, gosh, I sound terrible. And then after I listen to it, it's not so bad. And I feel like as I do it more and more, it gets better. I cannot tell you this is the middle of the year in 2020, one of the toughest years experienced in a very long time. Our country is in a very difficult and tough space. We have experienced a pandemic and coronavirus that hit us both health-wise and economically. It affected our clients, affected all of their practices. We are in the recovery phase of that, I hope, and coming out of it. And now we are in the midst of a national tragedy and a national awakening during a very tough time in our country of equality. And of course, I'm referring to the events with George Floyd. And I do not have the proper words to comment on the atrocity that was. But my hope is that we will not lose sight of it. We will not forget it. We will shed the negative of it in our country. We are having an awakening, and although it's a terrible, terrible time and a difficult reactionary time, it is very likely necessary. And that kind of awakening has to happen constantly, I think, in our lives. I think of everything that happens as somehow this applies universally to something in life. And while that's happening to the social and justice system of our country, it creates a lot of self-evaluation. Are we self-aware? Are we showing that compassion for others? And again, not to get too far off our subject, but as it try to relate it back to what we're going to accomplish here, awareness and self-evaluation and challenging yourself to improve and to shed layers and to evolve into a better person, a better human being, a better steward in life, and as it pertains to this podcast, in finance. I think that's the ultimate accomplishment. And so I go back to, we're at this tough time in this country, and I think it finally made me do this. I have been planning to launch this podcast since January of 2020, and I had zero idea what was coming. And I have subsequently been on many podcasts to share the knowledge and get the information out there to help all the practice owners answer their questions through PPP loans and how do you survive through this down period. And it's been a struggle. So I got to tell you that it's a big weight off of my chest personally just to get this thing started. And as I'm saying it here, I'm literally feeling like the weight lifted off my chest, and I'm feeling this strange tingling, no joke, of we're launched. And this was such a trying to be a perfectionist to get this episode right. There was my problem, and I evolved myself through that process. So I definitely know I'm rambling at this point, and I want to make sure that I at least leave you with some sort of nugget that you can take away. If you haven't been able to take away anything from this yet, I think the first thing is that we start with awareness of ourselves currently. We start with an open mind that we are never perfect. Perfection is not a destination. Perfection is a process. And it's never attainable. It's always about progression, progress, improvement. And if we can at the very least accomplish that, if you can look back on your time and your life and say, I didn't waste my time listening to that stinking podcast. Financial Floss actually brought me things that were applicable, that enhanced my life. That's the ultimate goal. So maybe a few nuggets here at the end as we wrap this up. We'll try to keep most episodes to around 30 minutes or less. If we get some great interviews going, which I intend to, we may go as long as an hour, but we will try to keep these short and sweet. Go home tonight, okay? Whatever day it is for you when you're first listening to this, and take an inventory of where you are. One of the hardest things to acknowledge is it's harder for most people to acknowledge what they have going well or what they're good at. And I find that when I'm having the most difficult time making a decision or getting something done or feeling good about something, I got to go to the old-fashioned T-chart, and pros on one side, cons on the other, strengths on one side, weaknesses on the other, and write down your strengths. You'll put the strengths on one side and the weaknesses on the other, and you'll see that you'll probably fill your weaknesses a little bit easier. It's harder to fill your strengths. At least for most people who are higher achievers, they don't self-identify what their strengths are because they're not really comparing themselves to others. They are comparing themselves to their own personal or God-given potential. And as it pertains to finance, the things that I hope to empower you on is moving some of the weaknesses over to the strengths. And we'll do them one by one. But first, you need to write them down. And part of that is also writing down some of the numbers and taking an inventory of everything that you have in place in your life. What do you own? And this is, there are different levels of people listening to this, of levels of complexity. You might be in dental school right now. You might be, or residency. You might be in private practice, and young in private practice, or you may be a seasoned veteran in the profession. And so, whatever level you're at, document your net worth. And it's not something that we're going to judge anyone on. This is your own private number, but it's your own personal scorecard. It's the accumulation of all the decisions you've made until this point. It just shows up in the numbers. It's no different than your health score. Write down everything you own. And again, if you're a complex individual and you've done this before, you've done this anytime you've had to get a loan, or you're filling out a personal financial statement for a bank. Write down everything you own, starting with liquidity. How much do you have in cash? You can write down what you have in cash in the personal and in the business. Write down how much you have in investments, and how much is it in more liquid investments, maybe like brokerage accounts. How much of it is in retirement investments like IRAs or 401ks. How much do you have in real estate? How much is your home worth? Do you have any rental properties? Do you own your practice building? How much do you have in terms of all of the personal properties, your cars and your jewelry and your artwork and your things like that? Here's a tough one. If you own your business, how much is that business worth? We will definitely cover that in a future episode, but if you don't know that number, just put your business value at whatever your total annual collections is for now. Every single asset, every single thing you can think of that could be liquidated and spent, write it down. Then, everything you owe. How much do you have in home mortgage? How much do you have in office mortgage? Any real estate debt? How much do you have in business loans? Student loans, auto loans, credit cards. Write down all the balances. Total the assets, total the liabilities, and take the total assets minus the total liabilities, and you've got your net worth. And for some of you, especially the younger you are, that net worth may even be negative, and that's okay. Don't pass judgment on yourself. It's not about where you are today. It's about where you take it, okay, what you do with it. So let's start there. Start there by taking ownership and inventory of your entire financial life today and writing down what you feel like your strengths and your weaknesses are. And then write down what are your goals. Way back, one of my favorites was the old Zig Ziglar. You got to have goals. If you don't have goals, you're just a wandering generality. What are your financial goals? And I believe it is Dan Sullivan of Strategic Coach, who I've never really engaged with at this point, but I have followed for many years, who said a goal without a deadline is just a slogan. I believe that's the quote. So what are your financial goals? When I ask people this question, most often their answer number one is, I want to be debt-free. And my response to that is, well, we're going to see how bad you really want it, because you can certainly attain it, but you better be hyper-focused on it. And there will be a lot of shedding of beliefs and misinformation and financial education that you might have received up to this point. I got to tell you, this podcast is going to be a little bit controversial at times, because I don't care who's listening. I'm going to tell you the truth and how it works. And you may not like it. And your financial advisor may not like it. And that's okay, because I don't get paid anyway, any different. And I welcome the challenging questions on those controversial topics from time to time. Again, hit us up at info@profi2020.com. But start there. Take your inventory of where you're at today. Write down your strengths and weaknesses, and write down what your goals are, and put some deadlines on them. I would like to be debt-free by age X. Okay, how many years away is that? I would like to own a beach house, whatever it is. Write it down, because if you haven't written it down, it's not real. And if you maybe even take it a step further and you start keeping a financial journal, a financial journey journal and take some notes from these podcast episodes and write down what you learn and write down what you want to do with that lesson. And if we can be of any help or resource to you, never hesitate to reach out to us. But I tell you, I started, again, this was the, 15th or 20th time I tried launching this thing. And every recording I would start it, I'd get like 5-7 minutes in, this is terrible, I'd stumble, and I'd delete it. And now here we are in the first episode, and all I did was vent a little bit. And I think that's the best thing to come from it. So hopefully this is the worst episode you ever listened to, and every episode after this is on point and just totally blows you out of the water. I cannot wait to join the rest of the podcast community. I was super wowed. I got to give a shout out to Dr. Mark Costas. And when I attended the Voices of Dentistry, and where I'm recording here in my office, I've got a Voices of Dentistry piece behind me. It impacted me. It impacted me a lot. And I really was also nervous to go record a podcast with anyone. And I chose Mark because, his Dentalpreneur podcast and what he's taught there, and his the way he carries himself, the people he surrounds himself with, I've been in awe. So I want to thank him for hosting me. That was he may or may not know this, but that was the very first podcast that I had recorded. After that, I've recorded maybe a dozen, but he's becoming a good friend and a client, and he is a leader in the podcast community in general, as well as specifically for dentistry. So if you're listening to this for the first time and you haven't listened to his, I'm sure you probably have, but if not, make sure you make your way over to the Dentalpreneur podcast, hit him up. Both him and as many others as I can get to agree to have conversations with me, I am super thrilled to join this podcast community. It's kind of a nerdy thing. Again, been the fear of mine to finally get it launched and recorded, but I just can't tell you how good this feels finishing up this first episode. So anyhow, this is not about me. This is about you guys. And I can't wait to take those little nuggets, those little lessons, that little action item. If you will go on this journey with me, if you will create that financial journal and start writing things down, writing down your goals, and you'll share them with me, I would be super excited to go on that journey with you and give as much as I can to the community, specifically the healthcare, private practice, and dental community that has given so much to me in life. But for now, until next time, I'm Chris Sands. Thank you so much for listening to the first episode of Financial Floss, and can't wait to catch you on the next one.